Welcome back to LifePoint Students Online. Exciting stuff coming up. We got a lot of stuff coming up in May, June, and really kind of for the rest of the summer. But you know, don't want to jump too far ahead. A couple things you need to know. Obviously, you probably noticed here we have a new series today, and it's called, well, the overall thing is Intersections, where we're talking about how different areas of life kind of clash with things in the world around us, but especially when we're trying to serve God. But today's, the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about how culture clashes, just with God's kingdom and the world around us. But we're going to be looking at some biblical examples of how that took place. But beforehand, let's talk about some things that are coming up. Again, I've talked about this for a couple of weeks. You probably got an email about it. We're going to Laser Dome here on May 14th, so really just a couple weeks from now. Cost is $20. We're going to be there from around 7 to roughly 11, so it's going to be a later night. By the time we drive home, it might be closer to midnight. But please be at the church parking lot here at 5:45 so that we can leave and be there on time. The other thing is, if you're not familiar with it, they got laser tag there. We will have unlimited arcade games. You can do all sorts of stuff in all these like roller coaster simulators. We're gonna have some pizza. Anyway, it's gonna be a great time. Masks are required. That's not something we were asking, but that's something Laser Dome requires for now. But we're getting there. So that's exciting. If you have tried to sign up online and maybe had trouble or whatever, let me know and I'll get you signed up myself. We'll try to make it work out, whatever. Even if you don't sign up, if you feel maybe it's last minute and you show up, just give me kind of a heads up that you're kind of thinking about it. That way we can kind of plan for travel. The other thing is that, again, we sign up soon because time's getting close. Also, we are having graduate recognition on June 13th, 2021. That's a Sunday. At both services, we're going to kind of have some information shared about the graduates. We also have a small gift if you sign up with us and let us know. We want to recognize anyone and everyone we can. If you do, just kind of email me, J Thomas, capital J, capital T, Thomas, at lifepointpa.org. Email me and give us the name you prefer to be used. Kind of a graduation photo and kind of some of your plans for the future. We'll try to compile all that and kind of make it easy and just share that with the congregation and just really kind of celebrate this milestone with you guys. Again, just do that as soon as possible. Try and get it in before the end of the month of May. May 23rd, I think, is another, around that time, something like that. So just kind of get back to us here soon. Again, we will close that out if you don't get back to us, but we got weeks, so try to make it happen. One last thing, and again, maybe you heard of this already. Some of you might have already signed up, but we're doing a mission trip. It's a mini mission trip because, quite honestly, there's still not a lot of places that we can do kind of missional stuff. There's some, but again, with teens, it can be difficult sometimes to place. But we're having a mini mission trip. We're actually connecting and we're working with Ken Brook Bible Camp, which we have a long history here with. They have a great history within the central PA area. Wonderful camp, wonderful ministry. And really, part of our mission trip is helping them do ministry. We're going to be kind of doing a lot of the last minute repairs, mowing, painting, staining, yard work, whatever is available that we can to help them function better through the summer. And that can mean a whole lot, especially for the kids who arrive there for a week of camp or whatever. So that is June 11th and 12th, 2021. The cost is minimal, only $30. We're only paying for our meals, not room. We're going to have be use of one of their lodges. Friday night, we're going to do some campfire. We're going to do some games and just have a great time. And then really spend all that day Saturday working hard to kind of fix things. Trying to make something really awesome, really helpful for a great camp. and something that we can share together and gets us back to that normal that we've been talking about for months and months. So please sign up to that. Again, just like Laserdome, if you're having trouble, don't let that be an issue. If you really want to go, just let me know and we'll make it work out. So with all that, let's talk about culture, where the kingdom clashes with the world. So today's lesson, and the person we're really kind of looking at, is Esther, and we're talking about her courageous act in the book of Esther. So actually kind of our key verse is chapter 4, verse 6 through chapter 5, verse 3. Obviously, it's a great book regardless. Please read through it if you get a chance, if you haven't already. I think, again, it's one of those books that kind of gets looked over because it's near other books like Job, and they get kind of more attention. There's really good stuff in Esther. Again, it's an easy read. And I think the biggest part of the lesson is kind of what we're talking about today. So let's actually kind of go through some stuff. First, let's kind of look at the word culture. It gets thrown around a lot. We use it here in my message. We use it a lot in church, well, churches in general. But what does it really mean? Can we have, a kind of working definition? Well, so a working definition that maybe we can all kind of agree on, at least. In short, I would say that it's a common desire, attitude, and value of a group or people or peoples, and how that kind of develops. So if we agree on that kind of working definition, then I think it's not so hard to agree or look around and notice that, things like teams, schools, friend groups, cliques, churches, certainly, cities, countries can all have their own culture. And in having that, it goes, I think, even further still, is that the world also can have its own kind of culture as you take in all the other cultures. So I think when we think about cultures and cultural shifts, it is something that is constantly changing. What's cool today will not be necessarily be that cool thing tomorrow. Things will change. I don't necessarily have to tell you that or give you too many examples for you to kind of get on the same page with me. Think about game systems, phones, calendars. No, I'm just kidding. The point is like cars, all these things that we kind of look past that change. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned something about cultural changes, and I mentioned like MC Hammer pants. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that only proves that things change. And I'm not saying whether or not someone owned a pair. We're not getting into that. Now, so it's with culture, it's so much less than just the message. The things change, but the message is consistent. The message is consistent. The object or the thing or the people changes, but the message is consistent. And that ultimately is that it really is more about people and things are holding a greater value in these cultural things, all these cultures, but they have more value than God. Think about it. Even just look around a lot of the hot button topics, the very news articles you read every day. It's this group, it's that group, it's this event, it's this problem, it's, on and on and go. We see the culture shifting. We see this group is now bad and that group is now good. On and on it goes. But in all of that, drinking Coke is bad, drinking Coke is good. Like butter's bad, butter's good. But it can be big issues and it can be small issues, but you see my point. Things always change, but always it focuses on people or things. How many people do you see trying to pull God into the national conversation about this, that, or the other? How many people, and I'm not saying that there aren't some people, certainly there are, but as a whole, are we bringing them in? Are we bringing God into the whole conversation? Ultimately, no. So, having said that, the culture of God's kingdom is the opposite. God's people value Him more than everything else. So, kind of being at that place, standing at that point where things collide. This is kind of why we call it intersections. These two cultures can be scary. There's a lot of friction between them, and Christ warned us of that. He said, serving me will lead to persecution. It will lead to problem. He's like, if they came after me, they will certainly come after you. We should expect that. But therein lies some of the difficulty. Sometimes it's easier, or at least we think it is, to disobey God and protect ourselves. Protect, maybe not even ourselves physically, maybe it's protecting our reputation, our image, our social status. Those can be things that we cultivate for so long and yet can come crumbling down because we take one stand in our faith. We see this a lot. I don't like to use the term, but we see this a lot with cancel culture. People make mistakes. People will sell out certain beliefs they had for other beliefs. Whether it's right or wrong, the point is that if we, as Christians, as Christ followers, we might be, when we're pressed, think about Peter denying Christ 3 times. Let's get rid of even just the modern examples. Let's look at Peter. He denied Christ 3 times because it saved his saved his physical person. Or at least that's what he thought. We don't really know. We don't know what would have happened. But Peter disobeyed. He rejected God in that moment. And it's easier to do that than to endure that friction of where things collide. Obviously, there are other examples. And one of them is Esther. And those examples, like Esther, show us how to face fear and friction with a courageous heart and a courageous obedience. So, who then was Esther? Well, she was an Israelite living in a foreign culture. Okay, so how did she get to be in that culture? How did this come to be? Well, a little bit of background. Esther lived in Persia under King Xerxes. Right now, we talked about this some series ago. Persia and all that stuff in the Old Testament. And like many Jews, Esther was part of a remnant of Israelites living in exile. Okay, so why was this remnant living in exile? So let's backtrack a little bit. Let's give some history here because it's important. It actually plays a big, huge role. So think back. A couple series ago, we did something called the Big Story of the Bible. We also did a season in the Minors. These were all series that talked about the Jews were being unfaithful and fractured the kingdom, Israel and Judah, and because of that disobedience, because of that consistent and long-standing unfaithfulness, God says, I'm going to judge you. And he sends prophets to warn them, and they don't listen. So finally, God brings judgment. First, he brings the Babylonians. They destroy Judah. Then he brings the Assyrians. They destroy this southern kingdom of Israel. Reverse that. Israel's north and Judah's south. But the point is that he sends these armies to punish. And now, because of, again, of their unfaithfulness, he used Assyria, and Assyria was later defeated by the Persians. But when Assyria destroyed, it took, not only destroyed Israel, but it took many captives. Those captives eventually went to Persia over a long, long period of time. Now, those captives, I wouldn't say they were free, I wouldn't say they were totally enslaved. It's kind of a little bit of both. Some held positions of influence and power, but not too great. And we're going to get into that a little bit. Esther is one such example. She was neither totally enslaved nor totally free. But Esther, as we understand, is a descendant of those captives that were taken out of Israel. So she is an Israelite, but she's an orphan when we see her and meet her in the Bible. But she was raised by her cousin Mordecai. Mordecai also is a prime example and a character that is very influential in the story of Esther. So, long story short, and you can read it for yourself. We're kind of paraphrasing here, but not too much. The king, basically, King Xerxes, basically held a beauty pageant to find a suitable queen. You can argue the quality of that all you like, but that's what happened. So in this situation, Esther is the one who won. And in doing so, she actually became very immensely popular with everyone like in the palace, even within kind of like the kingdom. And especially the king, because Xerxes was king, and he eventually wed Esther, and in doing so, made her queen. So she went from somewhat slave or enslaved to queen. Now, again, there's a lot more story to it. So please read Esther, and you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. Now, part of this whole situation is Mordecai had at one point advised Esther to keep her Israelite heritage a secret, well, forever, if possible. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Remember, these were captives. They weren't necessarily free, but in Persia was kind of odd that way, I think, where they weren't necessarily free, but they also were totally enslaved. And again, like I said, so many actually did find positions of influence. Mordecai is one such person. But there was still like a friction. Here it goes back to culture again, right? There was friction between the Israelite culture, and there was friction in the Persian culture. So they didn't always get along. That actually kind of brings us to the main antagonist, right? The main issue. But that's kind of Esther's background. But what's the story of her courage? Well, that kind of goes where the friction lies. The king's right-hand man, the kind of guy who does all the dirty stuff on the side, his name's Haman. And at some point, he becomes very offended by a lot of the Israelites. Again, friction, cultural friction. But he specifically kind of zeroes in on Mordecai, because I guess at some point, Mordecai doesn't bow in front of him. Again, maybe it's a big deal. I don't know. But essentially, after that, Haman asked the king to issue a decree that would destroy Mordecai and all the Israelites in the kingdom. So you have this person who's kind of like obviously demonizing this kind of blight as he sees it in their culture, something that's ruining their culture. It's a danger. And he's kind of, putting them as the bad guy and everything. And he's trying to push the king to be like, if you don't get rid of this, there's going to be an issue later, right? Again, there's parallels in history and stuff we see today with people pushing for certain things. Do they have Mordecai's kind of motivation at heart, the same thing? Maybe some do. I don't know. But in the end, after hearing all of this, the king kind of agrees to it, but this puts Mordecai in a bad position. And after hearing that Mordecai was in trouble, along with all of the rest of the Israelites in Persia, Esther decided to act. Now, she didn't have to do that. She could have kept her secret. She could have stayed safe and comfortable in the palace, but she doesn't. Esther, what she does is entered into the king's chamber unannounced, and it's not like she was asked to come. She was not invited. She did it to make the king aware of Haman's plan. No big deal, right? That's okay. We all can just enter in as we come and go, right? No, that's actually a big problem. Again, doesn't sound like a big deal, but the very act itself was punishable by death to anyone, even the queen. Again, this is anyone. You couldn't just waltz right in. Now, again, we can argue over this, but the point is, especially even just it's the queen, but it's a woman as well, and that was also kind of very frowned upon. So it's like kind of the double whammy. She's a woman, yeah, she's the queen, but she's still a woman, and she's just bursting right into his chamber of the palace, his throne room. However, through all of this, still, Xerxes is moved by the act. He has compassion for his queen, and by sparing her life, which is what he does, she was able to expose Haman and save the Israelites, who lived and sort of still kind of flourished a bit in Persia. Now that plays huge roles, huge dividend, huge, great consequences down the way. We'll get to that. But that very act, that very act of courage, she had to go against the culture, in some ways even her own culture, because she had to kind of express, who she was as an Israelite. The act of courage is significant. She had to do this thing where she exposed her secret of being an Israelite, but that's the very thing, I think, that moved her husband, the king. Because now she says, not only is this happening, but now I'm in danger because, I'm an Israelite. And that's what moves him so much to almost save his own queen and then also the people. So with the Israelites saved, years later, Jews like Nehemiah would be able to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and the walls of Israel. Jerusalem specifically. Walls of the city of Jerusalem. This is huge. Now we've mentioned this a couple series ago, like how Nehemiah did all this building of the wall, and Ezekiel rebuilt the temple because they were destroyed by the Assyrians many, many decades ago. This is huge because it wasn't that Esther just saved all of the Israelites. That's not enough. Of course she did that. But think about, as time went on, Nehemiah was in a position to influence the king of Persia later on, who paid for the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, who paid for the rebuilding of the city walls to protect Jerusalem. Jerusalem became basically a city again, and eventually a nation again, all because Esther saved everybody. Point is that one brave act of courage set the table for all these things to happen. If she didn't do it, yes, God would have found another way, but it might have been a while. So, huge things. So let's kind of, take note of some stuff here. God blessed Esther and placed her at the proper place and time, right? He, influenced her and through people like Mordecai. He initially said, stand up, but he also kept her knowledgeable of what her faith really was. He might have said, hide it because you might be in danger, but she used that very same knowledge to save everyone. Now, of course, as we kind of break things down here or come to a close, your conflict with culture may not be nearly as intense as Esther's, whenever it is, however it is, but we can obviously still learn from Esther. She hid her heritage, maybe for good reason. Who can say really? But ultimately, it is that very heritage that saved her and many others. And so, it was really a powerful thing rather than a hindrance. So, like that, we should not hide our faith and stand against, the movement of culture, because when we stand, we draw attention to ourselves. Sometimes maybe a dangerous attention. But that's what God has called us to do. That's what He's equipped us to do. And so with that, I hope you have a wonderful and blessed day and some good conversations from this lesson. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.